At some point today, you probably thought about someone. Maybe it was the first thing that happened when you woke up. A face, a name, a feeling you couldn't quite explain. You didn't choose to think about them, it just happened. And you probably assumed that was a very modern, very personal thing. But here's what nobody tells you. That exact experience, that uninvited face appearing in your mind, is one of the oldest things a human brain has ever done. Older than writing, older than farming. Older, possibly, than the human species itself. So the question isn't really whether ancient humans fell in love. The question is, could they have survived without it? Let's start in 2007. In a field in northern Italy, a construction crew was clearing ground for a factory, and they hit something unexpected. A burial. Two young people, probably around 20 years old, were lying face to face. Legs tangled together, arms wrapped around each other, in an embrace so complete that 6,000 years of soil hadn't moved them apart. The archaeologist who led the excavation, Elena Minotti, later said that double burials from the Neolithic period are almost unheard of. These two were even hugging. When someone asked her directly, was this love? She didn't hesitate. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, from thousands of years ago, we feel the strength of this love. Yes, we must call it love. But here's the detail that stops people cold. That burial site sits near Mantua in northern Italy. 40 kilometers south of Mantua is a city called Verona. You know Verona? It's the city where Shakespeare set Romeo and Juliet. Two teenagers, an embrace that outlasted everything around them. Found by accident, in the exact region where the world's most famous love story was written 2,000 years later. That's not a metaphor, that literally happened. But the lovers of Valdaro are only the beginning. Because in 1972, archaeologists digging in northwestern Iran found something even stranger. Inside an ancient mud brick grain storage bin in the ruins of a city that had burned to the ground around 800 BCE, they found two skeletons, locked in a final embrace, faces touching, like they were sharing a last kiss while their world ended in fire. For 50 years, they were known as the Hassanlu lovers. Everyone assumed it was a man and a woman, a romantic pair who died together as the city fell. Then modern DNA analysis revealed something nobody expected. Both skeletons were genetically male. Think about what that means. Two men in a burning city reached for each other as everything ended. Were they brothers? Close friends? Something else entirely? The science can't say for sure. But the instinct was the same instinct that drives every human being who has ever faced something unbearable. They reached for the person who mattered most. And that's not a lesser story than the one everyone assumed. It might be a more honest one. Now let's go back further, much further, to a cave in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq, 65,000 years ago before modern humans had even reached Europe. In 1960, an archaeologist named Ralph Selecki was excavating Shanidar Cave when he found the skeleton of a Neanderthal male, a species that preceded us, that most people still picture as dumb and brutish, but surrounding the skeleton, dense clumps of ancient pollen. A French specialist analyzed it and concluded it came from flowers. Not wild growth placed there deliberately, laid around the body as an offering, possibly as a mark of affection or a sign of respect. This single finding changed how science viewed Neanderthals entirely. Before it, the dominant view was that they felt nothing worth calling grief. After it, that view became very difficult to hold. Now, I should be honest, the debate has been going on for 60 years, and it's still not settled. A team in 2023 published evidence that the pollen may have been carried into the cave by burrowing bees, not mourning Neanderthals. But here's the thing. Cambridge researchers excavating the same cave recently found a new Neanderthal skeleton in the exact same cluster. And they stated that the Shanidar Neanderthals may have been thinking about death and its aftermath in ways not so very different from ourselves. Near the burial site, there's a large flat stone. It may have served as a marker, a way for Neanderthals to return to the same location and bury their dead there, generation after generation. Deliberately, repeatedly, over tens of thousands of years. You don't do that unless the person mattered, but the bones only take you so far. Because in 1951, a scholar named Samuel Noah Kramer reached into a museum drawer in Istanbul and pulled out a clay tablet that had been sitting there untranslated for decades. He later wrote that what he held in his hand was one of the oldest love songs ever written down by man. The tablet was 4,000 years old. It came from ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. It was written for a king named Shusin, composed to be recited by a high priestess during a sacred ceremony at the New Year, and the language in it wasn't distant or ceremonial. It was immediate, physical, raw in a way that surprises people who assume ancient humans were too primitive for real emotion. Before this discovery, the Song of Songs from the Bible was considered the oldest love poem in existence. This tablet preceded it by over 1,000 years. And some scholars now believe the Bible's most romantic text may have been directly inspired by the Mesopotamian literature that came before it. 4,000 years ago, someone felt something so urgent and so real that they pressed it into clay so it would never disappear. And it didn't. Here's where it gets truly strange, because scientists didn't just find evidence of love in bones and poems and buried embraces, they found it inside living human brains. And what they found there answered a question nobody had thought to ask. A biological anthropologist named Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers University placed people inside brain scanning machines, and she simply showed them a photograph of the person they loved, what lit up in their brains, the dopamine-rich reward and motivation regions. The same deep structures that activate for food, for water, for survival itself. Not the regions associated with emotion or sentiment, the survival regions. Her conclusion was blunt. Romantic love is not a feeling layered on top of life. It is wired into the same circuits that keep you alive. And in 2024, a research team from the Australian National University published the first study directly measuring how ancient those circuits are. Their conclusion? Romantic love likely first emerged approximately 5 million years ago, after the human line split from the great apes. The underlying neurobiological machinery predates our species entirely. Think about that. The circuits in your brain that activate when you see that face, the ones that steal your appetite and interrupt your sleep, were running in creatures that looked nothing like you 5 million years ago. You didn't inherit this from culture. You didn't learn it from movies or books. It was already there waiting the moment you were born. There's one more piece of evidence, the most personal one. In 2010, a geneticist named Svante Pääbo announced something that stunned the scientific world. Modern humans and Neanderthals, two separate species, separated by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, had interbred. They had children together, and those children's descendants eventually became us. If you are of non-African descent, between 1 and 4% of your DNA came from a Neanderthal. In 2022, Pääbo won the Nobel Prize for this work. And the implication sitting underneath all of it is one that nobody quite says out loud. Somewhere in the deep past, two different kinds of humans met each other across a boundary that biology said should not be crossed, and they crossed it anyway. And the children born from that crossing were kept, raised, carried forward into the future. You don't raise a child across species lines unless something more than biology was happening. So here's what all of it adds up to. The teenagers in Italy still holding each other after 6,000 years, the two men in Iran reaching for each other as the city burned, the Neanderthal buried under flowers in a cave, older than civilization, the poem pressed into clay so the feeling would survive, the brain circuits that predate humanity itself, the DNA in your body right now from a love story older than agriculture. None of this was supposed to exist. For a very long time, the assumption was that love was modern, that it came after civilization, after language, after religion, that ancient people were too busy surviving to feel anything as subtle as this. But the evidence says something completely different. Love didn't come after survival. Love was survival. It was the mechanism that kept two people near each other long enough to raise a child through the most dangerous years. It was the thing that made a Neanderthal place flowers on a grave. It was the thing that made two strangers from different tribes find each other and never let go. The first human who fell in love probably thought they were going insane. They couldn't eat. They couldn't sleep. One face appeared in their mind and refused to leave. They had no word for what was happening to them. But the feeling was real, and it was already ancient.